Alright, hello everyone, welcome to part 6 of the series. I have recorded this video probably 10 times now, and every single time there's been an interruption around 10-15 minutes in, or the file got corrupted, or the dog started barking incessantly. So, I'm pretty pissed off about making this video. Hopefully, I'm probably going to go through it quickly. I hope I still explain everything as thoroughly and as clearly as I want to. If I don't, let me know in the comments below. I'll redo the video at a later point. I'll still do all the timestamps in the description. I'll try to make everything as best as possible. So with that being said, let's jump right into the strengths and weaknesses of the Hunter. So the Hunter has very good ability to close the game with its hero power, deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. It's got some very strong class cards in the case of Savannah Highmane. Some of the weaknesses include that its hero power doesn't affect the board, and Hunters are very dependent on gaining board control, so not having a hero power that affects the board is quite an issue there. And it doesn't have very good catch-up mechanisms. Unleash the Hounds isn't very strong. Explosive Shot is pretty hard to get because it's rare. So those comeback mechanisms and other cards that a Hunter will use to try to get back in the game and re-establish board control are few and far between, and they're generally not very valuable. So they struggle really severely when they're behind. Let's jump right into the weapons. I just talked about how board clear is so important when you're playing Hunter, and that's the case here. So almost all weapons when you're playing Hunter are good in the sense that they will allow you to push your advantage and go for board control and go for card advantage. So with that being said, Glaivezooka itself isn't the most powerful weapon that's been printed in terms of strength and stats, but it's still good enough to justify playing and justify that it's like a good card to play as Hunter. The random friendly minion +1 attack is equivalent to around a Whirling Blades, which is 1/3 of a mana crystal because it's equivalent to a spare part, which is worth that much in terms of mana. But the two attack and the 2 durability is enough to justify putting Glaivezooka in your deck. It's very good. Eaglehorn Bow. This is a Fiery War Axe that costs 1 more mana. In the case that it's just a Fiery War Axe that costs 1 more mana, this card is still good. It's still above average, I'd say. But in the case you get the card text, the caveat of it costing 1 more mana, whenever a friendly secret is revealed, gain +1 durability. This card is insane. Like, probably the best card that you can possibly get. The +1 durability is 3 mana, 3/3. That card hasn't been printed. The closest thing is a Stormforge Axe, which is 2 mana, 2 mana, overload 1, 2 attack, 3 durability. And that card's still a top tier pick in Arena because of its durability. So with that being said, Eaglehorn Bow, very good. I suggest picking it up most of the time. And if you get the secret, it's disgustingly good. Gladiator's Longbow. I talked about this a lot in the other videos. I didn't talk about this as much here, but board control is the most important part of playing Hunter in the early game. Gladiator's Longbow is a weapon that you're not going to be able to play in the early game because it costs 7 mana. And once you establish board control, using your health as a resource to further that board control is more or less irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. So the fact that you're paying 2 extra mana for an Arcanite Reaper, this card is a 7 mana, 5 attack, 2 durability. If you're paying 2 extra mana for your hero to be immune while attacking, it's a complete waste of 2 mana. And you rarely will ever need that when you're playing Hunter. So with that being said, I think Gladiator's Longbow is actually quite bad. It can be better than some of the other epics. We'll look at some of the epics later in terms of spells. Like Bestial Wrath, which is probably the worst card you could ever pick up ever. But yeah, Gladiator's Longbow, it can be useful, but it's not worth it. Especially when you're trying to establish board control and you have to dedicate an entire turn to playing it, and it's guaranteed over. Like if you compare this to Gorehowl, Gorehowl is 7 mana, and it has a 7 attack charge, a 6 attack charge, a 5 attack charge, a 4 attack charge, a 3 attack charge, yada yada yada. That card is insane because you get so many attacks and you get so many opportunities to generate card advantage and generate board control. The Gladiator's Longbow, you only get 2 chances, and you only get 5 attack, and it costs 7 mana. Like, all those reasons combined, I think it's a really bad card. Let's jump into secrets. Explosive Trap. Explosive Trap is probably your best secret because it's one of the few mechanisms that a hunter has to come back into the game in the case they fall behind, because it's strictly consecration, but your opponent gets to choose how the consecration is triggered, when it is triggered, and what he does first to play around it, which is a pretty massive caveat, actually. And that's why I give this card probably a 4 or a 5 rather than a 7 or an 8. It's probably a 5 or a 6, I'll say, because it's one of the opportunities that a hunter has. Say if you have no board and you play the explosive trap, he has no opportunity to either not attack at all, which is like do nothing, which isn't good, or he plays into your explosive trap and you're able to clear some of his minions and get some advantage, and at least make some sort of attempt at a comeback with the explosive trap. And for that reason, the card's very good. Like I said, 5 or a 6. Freezing Trap. Freezing Trap is not as good as it is in Arena as it is in Constructed, because in Constructed you have such a low cost deck that you're just constantly pushing and pushing your advantage, and pushing more damage and pushing more damage and pushing more damage, and eventually you just kind of win the game, and the minion that's been returned that costs 2 more is likely irrelevant and can't be played because it costs 2 more, and you're just trying to constantly play things that will effectively deal with your with the hunter stuff that he's been playing. In Arena, this won't be the case. They will likely play the minion that your Freezing Trap has played, mostly on the basis of the games will last longer, because you won't have reliably the same amount of synergistic effects, the same amount of damage, and you can't always guarantee that your opponent is going to bounce back something that's your opponent will unintentionally bounce back something that's like super good for you. Yeah, it's still a good card because it allows you to gain card advantage, or not a card advantage, it allows you to gain a tempo advantage, and that's during that opportunity you want to kind of seize that advantage to shove more creatures on the board, push for more board control, and once you take complete control of the board, which Freezing Trap can help you with, the fact that your opponent will play it at a later turn won't be a big deal, because you'll be able to deal with it thanks to your large board and the control you have. So Freezing Trap is okay. Okay to good. 4 to 5. Snipe. Snipe and Misdirection are kind of similar in the sense that you can't guarantee getting value out of these cards ever. There's so many variables and your opponent can play around them quite well that it's very difficult to reliably get value and evaluate them as well. Snipe is, in terms of damage, it's much better than your 2 mana deal 3 damage, which is your standard cookie cutter card, which is very good. It's instead deal 4 damage, which is quite strong. However, your opponent, excuse me, it's essentially saying you play Flame Cannon on the next minion your opponent plays, which is, excuse me, you can't guarantee value out of that. If it destroys a 2 mana creature, that's okay. If it destroys a 3 mana creature, that's good. If it destroys a 4 mana creature, that's great. Anything above it won't really destroy. So hopefully you already have a board to deal with the minion that you've sniped, which is good. But in the case that it hits Divine Shield, it's completely useless. In the case it hits a 0 mana or a 1 mana creature, you're just completely wasting your turn. So it's hard to evaluate. I think it's on the lower end of things still, because I'd rather have cards that are reliable and I know what I'm getting out of them, rather than going for broke and trying to gain a massive advantage on like a lucky play or your opponent not playing around the right cards. Snake Trap is, I'd say, aggressively mediocre in terms of secrets. It gives you a nice board. It'll summon 3/1/1 snakes when one of your minions are attacked and is attacked. Is that the right grammar? One of your minions is attacked? Yes, because they're talking about one of your minions. When one of your minions is attacked, getting the snakes on the board allows you to still maintain a board and some sort of control and some sort of ability to still have control of the game, which is good. But the 3/1/1 snakes are very vulnerable to board clear. and 2 mana for 3/1/1s is okay. It's not crazy optimal. Sometimes you can get some really great synergy with things like Hunter's Mark, with Scavenging Hyena, some of the other beast synergy cards, because the snakes that are played are beasts, which can be really effective as well if you have the right deck for it. But you want to draft those cards towards the end to try to build synergy in the end, like we talked about in the drafting for curve video. That card's pretty mediocre. Not bad, but mediocre. Also can work against you in the case of Enrage mechanics. Raging Worgen with the Wind Fury could be an issue. This card's probably a 5. Maybe lower, 4. It's not as good as Freezing Trap in my opinion. Misdirection. When your character attacks your hero, instead he or she attacks another random character. Okay, so if a character attacks your hero, so this means he can't make an efficient trade on your minion, or you don't have any minions, which is bad, he instead attacks another random character. In the case you misdirect, and your opponent's minion misdirects and instead hits his face. It's kind of a waste. It doesn't actually mean anything. In the case that his minion attacks one of his other minions and they both die or one of them dies, that's great for you. But you can't guarantee that because there's so many randoms here. It can randomly attack your creature. It can randomly attack their own creature. It can randomly attack their own hero. You can't reliably get value out of that, and that's why I think this card is bad. There will be times that you win the game off of a good misdirection. There will be times that you lose games out of your opponent playing some sort of crazy good misdirection. But it's so unreliable that I wouldn't justify putting it in a deck. This card is... I'm not giving it a rating. It's so random. It's so infrequent. It's very difficult to evaluate. Some people will like this card, some people will not. I'm one of the people that doesn't like this card. That's the way it is. Personal preference. I'm not sure what any of the websites say about the value of this card, but one good thing about it is you get to learn whether you think Misdirection is good or bad based on your own personal experience, and you can choose whether you want to put it in your deck. Let's keep moving on to spells. Hunter's Mark. One of these is fine. Any more is bad because it doesn't justify putting a slot in your deck. If you use Hunter's Mark, you're using a card to assist in something else killing something, which is a lot of somethings in one sentence. Basically what I'm saying is Hunter's Mark doesn't do anything on its own. It's dependent on another card, and that in itself is bad. Plus the fact that you need to play it with something else generates card disadvantage for you. If you need 2 cards to kill their 1 card, then you have a disadvantage. Your opponent has card advantage on you, which is bad. But Hunter's Mark itself is pretty strong, and you can get some synergy with things like Arcane Shot, things like Unleash the Hounds, things like Snake Trap, so you can make it work. So the first one I say is probably a 5. Any subsequent one is a 3 or a 2 or a 1. You don't want any more of them because you just kind of throwing away cards to the wind. And if you have to start top decking in Arena, that's where things get bad. Arcane Shot, 1.5 mana for dealing, 1 mana for 1.5 damage is what you would anticipate, and you're getting 2 damage, which is good. It's above average. Once again, it's a low-cost spell that you don't want too many of in your deck, because putting too many of them in your deck means that you have a lot of low-cost cards that can easily be dealt with. What did I just say? You have a lot of low-cost cards you can easily... No. You have a lot of low-cost spells that require other things to deal with your opponent's minions, and you're generating more and more card disadvantage for you. This card's probably a 6 or a 7. Any subsequent one's a 3 or a 4. I'd rather have 2 of these than 2 of Hunter's Marks. But still not a card you want to pick up a lot of. Tracking. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, draw 1 and discard the others. Discarding cards when you're playing Hunter is kind of a noob trap. Like, you look at it and you're like, oh, I discard these cards, I don't want to discard cards. I made this deck for a reason. This is kind of a common opinion that I know I fell into, at least when I started the game. But discarding cards is kind of irrelevant, actually, because when you discard the cards, it's very unlikely, especially when you're playing Hunter, for the game to go into fatigue in the first place, and the fact that you may go into fatigue a little earlier than your opponent likely won't matter in the course of the game, because Hunters have that hero power. Oh wow, what a voice crack! Hero power that puts you on a clock. Puts you on technically a 16 turn clock. If your opponent gains no life and you play hero powers every single turn, which you obviously don't do, but the clock is always ticking with the Hunter because you can always push in more and more damage. So that being said, the game is likely going to end before you fatigue, and drawing a card that you choose based on the situation for 1 mana instead of 1.5 mana is good. So this card is probably a 6 or a 7. Bestial Wrath. This card is a 1. I'll tell you right off the bat, this card is fucking terrible. Because it needs to give a beast +2 attack. So what's the likelihood you're going to get a beast? What's the likelihood you're going to give a minion immune? And what's like the necessity of giving a minion immune in a particular situation? And +2 attack is also on a it's on a card like a Abusive Sergeant, which is below average already and costs 1 mana. So like the effect itself is, I guess you could say it's worth 2 Whirling Blades, which is like 2/3 of a mana crystal. And then the immune is like the same thing as saying give it Divine Shield for a turn. So if you can pull this off, if you can pull off giving a beast +2 attack and immune and it kills an enemy creature, and you gain massive advantage off of it, congratulations. That's a very good use of 1 mana. This card is dependent on other cards to be good, so that's your first strike. The card itself is an epic, so it's hard to draft. I wouldn't necessarily call that a strike, but consider it a blessing for you. But the major strike is it has to be given on a beast. How can you reliably draft beasts in Arena? You really can't. So the likelihood that you'll have a beast to give this to is so unlikely, and the likelihood that you'll be able to play it on a beast is really unlikely. So this card is fucking terrible. I don't want to talk about it much longer. It kind of makes me upset that it exists. Quick Shot is your cookie cutter, 2 mana, deal 3 damage. That's good. If your hand is empty, draw a card. 0.5 mana, deal 3 damage is disgusting. It's probably one of the greatest cards they have. Like, best cards Hunters have. This card is an 8 or a 9. It's very simple, very standard. In the case that your hand's empty and you draw a card, it's fantastic. If you don't, it's still very good. If you draw a card with it, it's a 10. This card is insane. But yeah, the Quick Shot is very good. Call Pet is terrible. It's another one of these beast synergy cards that you can't guarantee that you're going to get beast synergy with. Draw a card. Excuse me. 4. 2 mana is bad, because you're paying more than you want. The card's only purpose is to draw a card, which is a downside, if you're not getting value out of it. If it's a beast, it costs 4 less. The likelihood, there are very few beasts in this game that cost more than 4 as it is. And if you get the value, if you get a 2 mana Savannah Highmane, congratulations, you can win the game. But the likelihood of getting that is so low that it doesn't justify putting it in your deck. It's a terrible card. You can't reliably draft beasts in Arena, and this card is only good if you get beasts. So there. I think this card is atrocious. It's a 1. Another 1. It's better than Bestial Wrath, but not by enough. Feign Death. Trigger all death rattles on your minions. A kind of cool picture to it, actually, but what is the likelihood that you are going to draft reliable and high-value death rattles on all of your minions? Very low. Feign Death is terrible. Also, you have to play all your death rattles at once to establish that value. So it's really bad. This is also a 1. I hope I explained that clearly enough. It's dependent on other cards to be good. You need to play all your death rattle minions at once. They need to not all die so that you can play your Feign Death. And then all of a sudden, if you trigger this, how are these death rattles like effective or worth it to justify spending 2 mana to trigger them all? And the answer is, it's very unlikely. Very, very unlikely. Deadly Shot, destroy your enemy minion. This card is fantastic because it's 3 mana and it's hard removal, and this allows a hunter to either catch up, perhaps, or push an advantage your opponent. You have, let's say, 2 or 3 low-cost minions on the board, like Bloodfin Raptors or River Crocolisks or whatever, something of the like that's really small, and your opponent plays a Boulder Fist Ogre, and you say, oh shit, this Boulder Fist Ogre can take care of all of my stuff, and I'm going to get behind. If you have your Deadly Shot, you just wasted your opponent's entire turn, and you destroyed his Boulder Fist Ogre. And you get to push in, you still have the advantage, you still have the tempo, you're winning the game super hard at that point. And you can likely run away and win the game. So Deadly Shot's really good. And the fact that it's random, I feel like if you have the board already, you can effectively control what your Deadly Shot will hit just by clearing the other minions on the board. But there will be times that you have to go for the 50-50, and it's still, I think, worth it. This card is strictly, I think, better than Crush. The Crush is the 7 mana destroy minion if you have a damage minion, it costs 4 less. So if you have a damage minion, costing 4 less is the same as this card, except you get to target the minion you destroyed. But the likelihood that you get a damage minion is so infrequent that I think that Deadly Shot is much better, because you can play it on anything. And if your opponent only plays 1 creature a turn, you get a guaranteed Crush with the damaged minion. So, very good. Let's keep moving on. Animal Companion. Animal Companion is fantastic. Let's put it this way. Alright, let's evaluate each one of the potential options you get. Huffer. 3 mana, deal 4 damage that can't go through taunt. Good enough. Also, puts a creature on the board. It can push for damage, it can deal a lot. Misha, 3 mana, 3/3. The ×2/+1 rule requests that you have 7 worth of stats. This card has 8, which is insane. There is no card printed like that besides Ogre Brute. And Ogre Brute has a chance to attack the wrong target, so Misha is very good. And Leok, it's not as good as Misha, obviously, based on its stats. It's got 6 worth of stats for 3 mana, which is okay. But the distribution is good, and there will be times that the +1 attack with your other minions is super beneficial to you. So, Animal Companion is fantastic. All 3 of its options are very good, or at least satisfactory. You can pick up almost as many of these as you want, and you could probably never be wrong. Also has some potential beast synergy. Let's keep moving. Cape? I don't know what the hell I just said. Unleash the Hounds. 3 mana for each enemy minion. Summon a 1/1 Hound with charge. So, this card is a comeback mechanism. So, in that sense, it's okay. But, it's essentially saying deal 1 damage for each creature your opponent has. And your opponent doesn't. If your opponent plays a lot of minions and you need the Unleash the Hounds, it is of high likelihood you're already behind on the board and you're probably losing the game. And if you I don't know why am I jumbling words so much? My apologies. If your opponent has 4 creatures on the board and you need your 4 Hounds, you're likely only going to be able to take out 1 or 2 of his things. So your opponent still has the board control and still has the advantage. So Unleash the Hounds isn't very strong board clear. It is board clear nonetheless, and it has some beast synergy, but I consider this card below average, probably a 4 or a 5. Kill Command, 3 mana, deal 3 damage is below average. 3 mana, deal 5 damage is slightly above average. The mathematics would suggest that a 3 mana card should deal 4.5 damage. Obviously you can't print half a damage, so dealing 5 damage is the next best thing. The likelihood of you having a beast is pretty low, but dealing 3 damage for 3 mana is below average as well. So I evaluate this card as below average as well. You can't reliably get beast synergy. Little easier to get than some of the other cards like Bestial Wrath, to work, but 3 mana deal 5 damage is good. 3 mana deal 3 damage is okay. Card's still okay. It still can be pretty useful because it can be used on minions, but it's hard to really justify picking it up for, like, oh, I'll reliably be able to do 5 damage. No, you won't. Sorry. I'll give it a 5. Let's keep moving. I think this is the last one, right? And we're at 25 minutes, so faster than some of the other videos, but alright, let's keep going. Multi-shot, deal 3 damage to 2 random enemy minions. This is slightly stronger cleave, I'd say. Cleave, we talked about in the warrior video. Multi-shot is 4 mana. It deals 6 damage in total, so you reached your damage requirement for, or you reach your damage for your mana requirement. And it's a comeback mechanism, and it's a board clear card. So for hunters to have this at their disposal is very good. It's kind of costly for the damage it deals, but I still think it's pretty good. I'll give it a 6 or a 7. 6 to 7 range on it. And it has more applications than Cleave does, because Cleave only does 2 damage, and you can't always get the minions to have 2 health. It's more likely for them to have at least 3. Cobra Shot is terrible, on the other hand. You just looked at Multi-Shot. Multi-Shot deals 6 damage. So does Cobra Shot, except it costs 1 more mana, and 3 of that damage guarantees goes to the enemy hero. Dealing damage to the enemy hero means more or less nothing unless you're winning the game, like winning the game with it. So if you need this card to use for board clear or use for board control, the fact that you're wasting some of the mana on dealing it to the enemy hero is bad. So with that being said, Cobra Shot's probably a 2 or a 3. Still better because it doesn't need beast synergy, but still pretty bad. Would you ever pay 5 mana to deal 3 damage? I'd take a kill command over that any day, and I already consider kill command below average. Explosive Shot is quite good as well. Our final card here. Deal 5 damage to a minion and 2 damage to adjacent ones. Your opponent can play around this card, which kind of sucks, because they can just properly align their minions in the right way so that your Explosive Shot gets less value. But 5 mana, deal 5 damage is okay. It's below the average, but there's things like Starfire and Starfall, which do that, which are druid spells. Which are still played because they're good enough, and 2 damage to the adjacent minions qualifies it as a board clear card that allows you to potentially gain advantage on your opponent. So with all that being said, it's another comeback mechanism for the hunter, and hunters kind of need those to make sure that they are always in the advantageous position, even if they are ahead on the board. So with that being said, Explosive Shot's probably a 7. Alright, so we talked about everything. I'll put timestamps below the video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you stay tuned for part 7. I'll catch you guys later. See ya.